there, my name is Cindy James and this is Friday Night Wax. So tonight I'd like to do a landscape painting using this abandoned farmhouse image, and maybe I'll use the birds as well. I'll do that painting on a 4x4, what I call an encaustic block, and it's just a pine block cut from a 2x6, and it has notches on all four sides on the back. I often don't pay attention to what orientation my block is, so my dad cuts these for me. He used to just put one notch on there, but never failed. I'd finish the painting and it would be on the side or upside down, so now he just puts them on all four sides. So this image or this PDF is available for you to use as well if you'd like. You can find the link to it below, and it will take you to my website where you can download this PDF. So please subscribe, sign up for my newsletter, like the video, whatever. But yeah, hopefully you can follow along, especially if you're a beginner or even not a beginner, but you never know what little tidbits may be learned. I know when people come to my studio, I always learn something from them too. So anyways, hope you enjoy it, and see you in a minute. So I usually work on 2 paintings at a time at least. Just helps me if I get stuck at all. Just gonna tape these up quickly. It's actually been a little while since I did any painting over Christmas holidays, so it'll be a good project for me to start up again. I tend to paint very small most of the time. You know, occasionally I will do larger paintings. I really like the 3x18 format. In fact, I do have a commission for one that I need to work on. So maybe I will start that next week. I like to tape off the back as well for ease of cleanup. All right, here we go. So this paper is printed on a laser printer. You can also make a photocopy, but I tend to use a pretty high quality paper. It's not glossy, but it is a fairly dense paper. I'll link that down below. So usually I will start with a base of white, but I think I'll do a white base on one and clear on the other, because I kind of like the transparency that the clear medium offers. So I'm going to try that today. My palette about 150 degrees, so it's fairly low. And I'll probably put about 4 to 6 coats on here before I fuse. Just because it takes a little while to get some wax on there. Find if you fuse before you get really anything built up, then it creates hot spots on the wood. about 6 layers of wax on. I'm going to add a couple more. If you let your panels cool, you get a thicker coating on as well. The key for a good image transfer is to make sure you have a smooth surface for your image. So you want to get out all those little bubbles and lumps. If you have trouble with that, I do have a video on how to get a smooth surface. And I'll put a link to that for you. I think I'll try to do like the same thing on both pieces and see what I like better. You know, okay, so I'm feeling drawn to this blue ochre and this steel de grain, and also my green gold. I believe that's green gold. Not my usual color palette, but let's see what we can do with this. It's a bit limited. Maybe this phthalo green pale for something that will pop. Okay, I'm going to try a little bit of this blue ochre and this phthalo green pale, and see if I can get a bit of a stormy-ish sky. The other thing to consider when you do your image transfer is that anything that is white will actually show the color that is beneath it. So, you know, once this is transferred, this window will show whatever is behind it. And that's just because there's no white ink in your printer generally. I think some printers can do it, but most printers do not have white ink. So any white is actually just the paper. And when you do the image transfer, you rub the paper away and you're left with basically a transparent spot. Okay, I just saw a little goober of something in there. I'm going to grab it right away. You can add a little bit of clear medium to your palette to extend your paint. Something else there too. My garage heater tends to blow stuff around, so I do a lot of dust removal. And I'll just keep this simple for our demonstration. I'll be interested to see what you might do with this image, so please feel free to tag me if you use it. It's there for you to use. If you have any questions, you can reach out to me as well. Now, I always try to remember not to just put my horizon line in the middle. That's kind of a bad habit. I'm going to go right down to the bottom because I just don't really have a plan for this. So this farmhouse is right on the highway between Edmonton and Calgary, and you only really notice it when you're going south. I've never noticed it on my way back from Calgary unless I'm actually keeping an eye out for it, and it's easy to miss, but it's right there on the side of the highway. I'm going to put some clear wax over before I fuse. Just, I don't know, I kind of like that effect sometimes it can give. We'll see what happens. I'll probably say that a lot. We'll see what happens, because that's kind of how I paint. Now, of course, you can use a heat gun instead of a torch, but you want to keep it moving. I'd say that using a torch is definitely quicker, and it offers more control because it's not blowing air, which can move your paint around a little bit more than you might want. Okay, I'm just gonna make sure I get all the bubbles out. I'll probably come back and fill in some of these edges. This one's separating a little bit, so maybe it was just a bit hot there, or who knows. Sometimes the white does funny things. Sometimes encaustic just does funny things. But I suspect maybe that was just a little bit warmer there. I'll leave that one alone. That looks pretty good. But I don't really like this blobby thing here. I should stop trying to add on. When your painting's hot and you try to add wax on, what happens is it actually ends up removing it. But there is a bit of fuzz there, so I'll take that off. You can see I use my torch at a pretty low setting. I also like a lot of texture in my paintings. I mean, encaustic is really great for that. I'm just going to add a little bit more darks down at the bottom here. Who knows, maybe I'll have a reflection of some kind. So this is the clear one, this is the one with white. I'll try to keep them on the same sides the whole time. Well, don't think there's going to be a lot of difference, but there could be a little bit more luminosity in this one. A lot of people don't really know where to start when they first get into encaustics. They might have taken a workshop and have fallen in love with it, pretty much like I did. And yeah, and then you get home and it's like, what do I do? Where do I start? What do I buy? Okay, I'm gonna flip this around because this little bit doesn't want to cooperate, so we'll put that in the background or in the ground. Okay, so I'm gonna add some of this and let's put some green in there. Not quite sure what that's gonna do, but I'm gonna go with this brush here. Ooh, that's pretty nasty. Okay, I'm just gonna add a little bit more. Oh, that's not bad. Maybe more green than I would like. Maybe I'll add some brown to that. Tone it down a bit. It's better. This is raw umber. Transparency. One thing about working on 2 paintings at a time is it kind of stops you from getting too focused on one, because sometimes that is a problem. Okay, I'm going to use my clear medium to go over this and just sort of catch part of that ground and hopefully push it back a little bit. Try again. Now I used to use the white to do this, and I think I read variations so that I have a choice. Like if you want it to show up this way, you'll have to take the other one because photo transfer is done with your photo face down, so it will be reversed to what you're looking at. So if I want my farmhouse to be that way, I'll need this one. I think I'll put it here. Now I usually trim it fairly close, but you want a bit of space. And you'll see why in a second. So this is still really warm because that wax was very fresh and I put on quite a few layers, and I'm going to just put it down below the horizon. I'm going to rub it with my finger a little bit, and I need a spoon. Okay, we're going to burnish this. So you don't want to press too hard while your wax is soft, and you can't burnish too much. I usually try to get all directions, and that's why you want your, like, you don't want to cut this guy out right around, because never fails, I go off the paper and I almost always dent my wax. So I put my finger here, and that helps, especially in the shorter areas. Now if you have wax on your spoon, you're going to need to take that off. And there is a little bit of wax on here, probably from my last class. Yep, I did it just like I said I would. I gouged it a bit, but that's okay. As long as you don't make it too deep, you should be able to fix, and plus we're going to add a bit on there anyway. All right. So I'm going to remove this and then do this one, just because I usually like to take the paper off right after I put it on. So if you've burnished well, you should have a pretty good, easy transfer. But like I say, you want your wax to be pretty warm when you do this. The spoon generates a little bit of heat as well. Okay, whoops. Set this guy aside. Now, I didn't know this until not all that long ago, but apparently wax and water will kind of explode if they are mixed, like hot wax. So if you were to pour water on a pallet full of wax, it could actually cool the wax. I suppose it probably depends how hot your wax is, but it can be dangerous. So I'm told. I haven't actually tried it, because that would be dumb. Anyway, you want to rub this gently. I usually do circular motions. I keep the paper saturated, but it'll come off in little bits, and you just keep going. Now, oftentimes when you're new at this, you think you're done, but you're not. Especially with a really solid image like this, it's quite dark. So you'll have to go until you really can't feel or see any more paper. So, and I'll show you how you can tell. For one, it kind of starts squeaking. And then if you just take some paper towel and I just gently wipe it off. You give it a minute or so to dry, and any paper that's left will usually start to show up as white. And I'll see if you can can you see the sheen where the paper was? So that's the coating on the paper that it's transferred onto the wax. And you can probably see there's a bit of white showing up here. So I will give that a little bit more water. And eventually you kind of get to the point where you start taking the image off, and then you can stop. All right, I'm going to set this guy aside for just a minute. Move this while I figure out this guy. Now he's cooled off, so I'm going to heat him up. Now I want it warm, quite warm. Liquid, but not so soft that when I start burnishing it will gouge the wax. Okay, there we go. I usually cut the bottom of my paper so that I can see, make sure it's going on straight. I don't know that it's much bigger, but we're using this one anyway. All right, so once again, I started with my finger, give it some pressure, and then I go to the spoon. So as the wax cools, I generally increase the pressure on the spoon a little bit. And if you always put your finger there, it definitely helps. Now, if you get really close to the edge and it's, you know, maybe a little bit curved down, you might notice that it's hard to burnish the edges. So sometimes what'll happen is if you don't burnish enough, when you take your paper off, your image comes off as well. Now, there's a number of ways you can fix that, and I think that would be a good video, but you can use a little bit of paint, like maybe a bit of oil paint. I'll often use like a tiny bit of watercolor. You could probably even use a marker, a Stabilo pencil. Oops, yep, now I got wax there. So basically anything that you can get on there that sticks. I mean, you can use wax as well. There's no reason why you can't add wax to this image and give it some texture. All right. I always put a piece of paper towel down just because these little bits of paper look a lot like white wax. And so sometimes they end up in my pot of wax. This is almost going a little too easy. Usually I struggle with that background a lot more. Okay, I'll give that a second to dry and see if we have any more paper on there, and I think I do. Yep. And when it starts to dry too, you can usually feel it as well as see it. I mean, it's not much. And when you fuse that, whatever's left will probably absorb down into the wax, but it can leave a texture on your painting too. So you want to get off as much as you can. That's probably going to be good. All right. Okay, so and there's a little bit more there. I think it's good enough though. All right, so there we are. We've got our two images. It's a tiny bit of paper on there, but I don't know really how much more I can take off. Maybe a little bit. I'm just using a little tiny bit of water now and quite a lot of pressure because it's, oh yeah, it's coming. Let's see. Yeah, pressing pretty hard. All right. Well, every little bit helps. Okay. It's a little better. All right, so I'm just going to pull these off. They tend to get annoying when my painting's not level. It's one of the nice things about these oven liners, or these are actually for barbecues, but I can usually pick these chunks off and just throw them right back in. When I first started painting with encaustic, I used to put down paper towel. And so, yeah, I really couldn't use any of the wax that overflowed onto from my paintings. So this is much better because there's nothing wrong with it. Okay, so I'm going to fuse this very gently. And I'll give it a couple of passes to make sure it's absorbed into the wax, but I'm going to be careful not to overdo it, because if the wax underneath it moves, your image will crack, because I mean it's stuck to the wax underneath. So you definitely want to be gentle with the fusing. So usually what I do is I just give them a quarter turn, make a pass over the surface, and you can see when it starts to, when it really starts to soak in. I might just keep going a little bit more. Hopefully I don't overdo it. All right. And you can also put a layer of wax over top as well. Okay, so we've got our basic farmhouse images, and so I'm going to add some texture to the foreground. Now I don't know which one was the one that had white. Well, okay, here, this one had the white, this one had the clear, so they don't look much different really. This one's maybe a little bit brighter. I'm going to put some of this green gold. Oh, you know what? Some of this. Forgot about my steel de green. or however you might pronounce that. All right, let's go here. Just gonna kind of dab it on with the edge of the brush. I'll try not to go kind of like straight. Took me a long time to use my brush in what was maybe different than the most obvious manner to use it. All right, and I don't want to lose all of this sort of mid-ground here, so I'm gonna try to kind of come down away from that a bit, and I'm gonna lighten that up too because it's still pretty dark. Maybe I'll add a little bit of blue in here. All right, see what happens. Oh yeah, got some contrast there. A little too light maybe. Not a big fan of that color there, so I think I'm gonna go back to a little bit more of my green gold. I'm going to add a bit of green earth to it. Now, you generally don't want this to get too thick before you fuse it. Even just a light fuse so you don't lose all your texture. And I'm just trying to vary my brush stroke so I can bring out some texture from the actual brush. Okay, well that's pretty dark, but I'll have to hit it with something lighter to contrast, I think. So I'm just going to give it a gentle fuse. Okay, well this could be shocking. Cadmium green pale. I'm going to try a little bit of that. I'll add a little bit in there to tone that down. Keep it harmonious somewhat. I'm going to try to set the farmhouse in there a bit. I'm not very purposeful with my colors. It's still something that I'm learning. But I'm getting mud, so don't like that. Although, let's, before I take that right off, maybe I can use this to my advantage. I don't paint realistically, so there's plenty of freedom in that. I'm going to bring in a little bit of this ochre again. Kind of lost that because I can see a little bit of it hidden down here, and I think that will help some. Okay, yeah, kind of iffy on that, but you know what? Usually when I get to this stage, I'm perfectly okay to scratch things up, see what develops. Just gonna put a little bit of clear medium on here. Sometimes that does funky things. I like that better already. Let's see what happens. I usually go too far, but I'm gonna try to leave some of these marks because I do like that. Ooh, and I like the layered look of the clear medium in the color as well. Kind of does some neat stuff. Okay, I like that better. Okay, so I like that a lot more. Oftentimes what I will do, I think I'm going to stick with this blue ochre, is I will add some texture right along the bottom because I like that. And in fact, I'm going to make it a little darker with some green umber. I'm just going to wipe my brush off a bit. I don't like this white here, so I'm going to try and get some marks along the bottom. I think it needs to be darker. All right. Just gonna make some lines here, but I'll use a smaller. There you go. Okay, I like that. I think I could benefit from a nice pop of color along the bottom. What would look good? I feel like a really bright, don't want red. Thinking this, that might look good. Let's try one. Just gonna wipe this off. Yeah, kind of like that. Less is more, Cindy, less is more. And when I fuse these, I'm not sure how much they're going to blob out, but we'll see. Put some that are maybe not quite so bright. All right, so let's see what happens when I fuse that. Now the trick is to not overdo it. Just oftentimes easier said than done. I find that if I force myself to stop and go a different direction, it's just enough time to keep it from, you know, lobbing out. Plus I might want some variation. Oh, I like that. Kind of like it when it spreads a bit. I might kind of take some of these lines out so they're not quite so even. Okay, I actually quite like that. Now, I can feel this, the paper there a bit, so it's probably not as saturated as I might like it. It should be fine. I mean, it can be scratched. It's printed with a laser printer, so I wouldn't expect it to fade unless it was in direct sunlight. But you can, if you want, put a swipe of clear medium over it. I don't think I will. I may change my mind later. I feel like it's absorbed enough wax that I don't need to do that. Sometimes I will on a bigger image transfer, just because it makes me feel more comfortable. Okay, so I'm just gonna add in a bit of my marks here again that I wiped out. And I need a place to sign it. I didn't leave myself a place to sign it. I mean, I grew up on the prairies, so I'm still very drawn to this sort of wide open, sparse imagery. I really do enjoy it. I love the seaside too, but this is the kind of thing I see all the time. All right, so I'm actually pretty happy with these. They're very simple, but I like simple. I'm going to just clean the edges, take off the tape, and see how I feel about it. Worst comes to worst, I can always put the tape back on and paint some more. But I mean, once the it does make a difference, it seems, when I scrape the edges. Now sometimes you get a little bit of wax that curls over to the top, and I like to just push that down with my finger before I fuse it, because what happens is it'll sometimes leave a little bit of color on the surface that I didn't necessarily want. So I find if I just sort of push it over the edge, it doesn't curl up and mark up my painting in a way I don't want it to. Some people like to leave that knuckle of wax along the edge, and that's perfectly fine. I mean, it can be more fragile because it's, I mean, if it gets bumped or knocked around, I mean, it could crack, but bumping or knocking around in encaustic painting could crack it anyway. Okay, so I'm just going to fuse this quick. I usually do around the edges before I peel off the tape, and then again after I peel the tape off. I think it's cool enough. Same on this side. Okay. So I'm pretty happy with these. I feel like I might want to put some birds in this area, and I might still do that. Put these guys here, maybe just two over here, kind of like that. Once again, I gotta warm this right up. These little birds won't take very long. That was a very quick burnish. You may get an example of the image peeling off. And you know, when you have a lot of white space like this, you don't have to rub all of that off. Just take your image off, and then, you know, really, you can just peel all that paper like that. Like you don't have to take the time to rub that off carefully. Yeah, like you just really just want to make sure there's no paper on the surface. Okay, I think that one's okay. And this one needs to be warmed up. Always move your towel out of the way. One nice thing about putting down a layer of clear wax over your background is that if you do make a mistake and you have to scrape a little bit off, you're not taking your background off. It makes it a lot easier to fix it. All right. You have a really large image to remove the paper from. It can get extremely tiring on the arm. So just be aware of that. The bigger the transfer, the longer this takes, and it does get tiring. That's why I scrape before tape removal and after, because there's always a bit of an edge that I like to take off. Okay, well, I kind of want a spot for my name to show up here, but it's not. It's not really showing up, so usually like light with dark underneath, that seems to work the best. I'll put some dark here. And then I'm going to fuse that and then put a little bit of a light over top. Plus I always like to give that final fuse after taking the tape off. Alright, I kind of want to put this color over here. Not quite sure where that might be. White maybe. And the trick with making these more precise lines in the wax is to really let it cool a little bit. All right, we'll see how that looks. I usually do quite a bit of fusing around the edges at the end because I really want to make sure they're solid, and I don't have any sort of weak spots, but these look pretty good. Okay, I'm actually pretty darn happy with those. You never know when you start what kind of painting day it's going to be, and I really like those. This one in particular. I'll wait till that cools and then I'll finish it with my signature. And I usually put black tape around the edges, so feel free to use these as a guide. And this original image of the birds, they were actually ducks, and the farmhouse, and I look forward to seeing what you create.